John Harper, a 68-year-old retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, his old flight jacket marked with the tenacity of countless missions, a simple nod his only greeting. On a rainy night at the Grand Regency Hotel, he arrives for a gala dinner honoring veterans his invitation held as sacred as a promise. But in a shocking betrayal, he is ejected from the VIP lounge, shamed and pushed into the storm to make way for a millionaire donor. In an instant, the entire staff faces a terrifying downfall, their jobs wiped out in the flames of justice. What spark of courage can turn this outrage into a movement that reshapes lives? Immerse yourself in a story of resilience and redemption that will light your heart. You are listening from a bustling city or a sleepy village. Leave a comment below because this story is Kaliang to you. The rain lashed down in sheets, turning the streets outside the Grand Regency Hotel into a glistening blur. John Harper, a 68-year-old retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, stood at the entrance, his calloused fingers clutching a sodden invitation to a gala honoring veterans. His old leather flight jacket, patched from years of wear, clung to his shoulders, paired with faded jeans and boots polished to a quiet shine. The hotel's golden glow promised warmth, but for John, the night was about to turn cold with betrayal. Inside the lobby pulsed with anticipation. Guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses swirled through the marble expanse, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. John stepped forward, presenting his invitation to Sophia Reed, the receptionist, whose sleek blazer and sharp gaze sized him up in an instant. She barely glanced at the paper before her lips twisted into a sneer. "This section's for real. VIPs," she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "Not old men in hand-me-down jackets, move aside. We're saving this spot for Mr. Richard Kane, our $5 million donor." John's gray eyes flickered, but he held his ground, offering the invitation again. "It's signed by the event director," he said, his tone even-measured. Sophia's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "A clerical error, obviously. You don't belong here." She snapped her fingers, summoning 2 security guards. Their broad frames loomed, faces hard. "Let's go, Grandpa," one grunted, seizing John's arm. The other pushed him toward the glass doors, ignoring the invitation, now crumpled in his grip. The lobby's opulence seemed to mock him as he was shoved into the storm. Rain-soaked John instantly streaming down his weathered face, but he didn't falter. He stood just beyond the awning water, pooling at his boots, his posture unyielding. The guard's rough hands had left a faint ache in his arm, but it was nothing compared to the sting of Sophia's words. He'd flown through fire, carried the weight of lives saved and lost, yet here on home soil, he was nobody. The gala was meant to honor men like him, yet they'd cast him out for a man whose only merit was money. Sophia's voice echoed in his mind. Richard Kane's the real VIP. John's jaw tightened. He knew men like Kane, flashy, self-important, buying respect with dollars. Inside, Sophia was already fawning over the billionaire her smile practiced as she gushed. "Mr. Kane, your generosity is transforming this event." Her co-worker nodded, impressed, as if John's ejection was a badge of her efficiency. The crowd sipping their drinks remained oblivious, their chatter drowning out the storm's roar. John reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. The screen glowed through the rain, displaying a message. "Don't leave, Harper. I'm on my way. No name. No context, just a spark of mystery." His brow furrowed. Who knew he was here, and why did they care? He slipped the phone back, his gaze fixed on the hotel's glowing facade. The rain was nothing compared to the deserts he'd endured, the nights spent waiting for dawn under enemy skies. He'd come to honor his fallen comrades, men whose faces haunted his dreams. That promise kept him rooted, immovable. The invitation, now a soaked ruin, was more than paper. It was a vow to stand for those who couldn't, to carry their memory into a world that too often forgot. John's chest rose with a slow breath, the cold seeping into his bones, but not his resolve. He'd faced death without flinching. A receptionist's scorn wouldn't break him, yet the injustice burned a reminder of how society valued wealth over sacrifice. Inside the gala's warmth contrasted sharply with the storm. Sophia leaned against the reception desk, boasting, "Kane's got the whole lounge now. That old guy was a nobody." Her words were a poison spreading through the air, unnoticed by the guests but heavy with consequence. The guards back at their posts exchanged a smug glance, satisfied with their work. But not everyone was blind to the scene outside. From the bar, a pair of eyes watched sharp and searching, catching the silhouette of a man who refused to bow to the rain. Someone saw John Harper, and in that fleeting glance, a seed of justice took root, ready to bloom. The Grand Regency's bar pulsed with the low hum of conversation, glasses clinking under the soft glow of chandeliers. Ethan Brooks, a 29-year-old bartender with a lean frame and a faint Air Force tattoo peeking from his sleeve, moved with practiced ease, pouring drinks for the gala's well-dressed guests. But his attention wasn't on the crowd. His eyes kept drifting to the rain-soaked figure outside, standing resolute beyond the hotel's glass doors. Something about the man's unyielding posture, the way he faced the storm without flinching, struck a chord deep in Ethan's chest. He paused, a damp rag forgotten in his hand, as a memory surfaced. Years ago at Nellis Air Force Base, he'd overheard stories in the hangar tales of a pilot who'd defied death itself. Lieutenant Colonel John Harper, they'd said, had flown his F-16 through a hail of anti-aircraft fire in the Gulf War, landing a burning jet to save his crew. Ethan's old sergeant had spoken of Harper with reverence, calling him a man who turned impossible odds into miracles. Could that be him, out there cast aside like refuse? Ethan's pulse quickened. He'd caught snippets of the receptionist's harsh words earlier, her smug dismissal of an old guy to make room for a wealthy donor. The injustice churned in his gut. He'd served 4 years fixing jets, seen the toll of war in the haunted eyes of returning pilots. Men like Harper weren't just veterans. They were the backbone of courage, the kind who carried scars so others wouldn't have to. To see one treated with such contempt at an event meant to honor sacrifice was a slap to everything Ethan held dear. He slipped behind the bar's counter, out of sight from the chatting guests. His fingers fumbled for his phone, scrolling to a contact marked Colonel Vance. His former commanding officer, now a senior figure in the Air Force, was the only person he trusted to act. Fast, Ethan's voice was low, trembling with urgency as he spoke. "Sir, it's Brooks from Nellis. I'm at the Grand Regency. They just threw out Lieutenant Colonel John Harper. Yes, that Harper for some rich guy. He's standing outside in the rain." A brief silence, then a clipped response. "Stay there. I'm handling it." The call ended, leaving Ethan's heart pounding. He leaned against the counter, steadying his breath. The bar's noise felt distant now, the laughter of strangers grating against the weight of what he'd just done. He'd lit a fuse, and though he didn't know what would follow, the colonel's tone promised swift action. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the stories he'd heard. Harper had saved 18 lives in 1991, flying 6 missions under enemy fire, each one a gamble with death. His name was whispered in awe, a legend among those who understood the cost of valor. A guest waved for a refill, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes flicked back to the window where the lone figure stood, rain cascading off his shoulders. The man's stillness was a kind of defiance, a refusal to let humiliation break him. Ethan's chest tightened with admiration. He'd fixed planes, not flown them, but he knew the unspoken bond between those who served Harper had never left a man behind in war. Ethan wouldn't leave him now. The crowd around him swirled, oblivious to the storm's true weight. A woman in a velvet dress complained about her cocktail, her voice a sharp contrast to the quiet resolve outside. Ethan's fingers twitched restless. He wanted to march to the reception desk, demand answers. But he knew his call was the smarter play. Colonel Vance's influence reached far enough to shake this gilded cage. Whoever he sent would carry the authority to make the hotel regret its arrogance. Ethan's gaze lingered on the rain-streaked glass, the figure beyond it, a beacon of resilience. His call had set something in motion, a ripple that would soon crash through the gala's polished surface. He didn't know who was coming or how they'd arrive, but the promise in Vance's voice was a spark in the dark. For now Ethan stood watch, his heart tethered to the man outside, waiting for the moment justice would strike. Inside the gala's false warmth glowed brighter, its guests blind to the gathering storm. The Grand Regency's VIP lounge shimmered with decadence, its crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over velvet chairs and polished tables. Guests in bespoke suits and glittering gowns mingled their voices, a soft hum, beneath the clink of champagne flutes. At the center of it all stood Richard Kane, a billionaire real estate tycoon, his tailored tuxedo gleaming as he basked in the crowd's adulation. His recent $5 million donation to the Veterans Gala had earned him a throne of sorts, with organizers fawning over his every word. To them, he was the evening's true star, his wealth a beacon in a sea of lesser lights. On a raised platform, the event's host, a slick-haired man in a pinstripe suit, tapped his glass, his smile as polished as the marble floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice, smooth, practiced tonight. "We honor the brave men and women who served our nation. But let's also celebrate visionaries like Mr. Richard Kane, whose generosity makes this possible." The room erupted in applause, hands clapping with fervor, phones flashing to capture the moment. Kane raised his glass, his grin wide, soaking in the praise like a man accustomed to buying admiration. Behind the scenes, Sophia Reed, the receptionist, leaned against a gilded pillar, her smirk sharp as she whispered to a coworker. "I cleared out that scruffy old man in no time." She boasted, her voice low but smug. "Kane deserves the spotlight, not some nobody in a beat-up jacket." Her colleague chuckled, nodding as if Sophia's cruelty were a badge of cleverness. The lounge buzzed with similar sentiments, guests murmuring about Kane's latest skyscraper or his private jet, their chatter drowning out the gala's supposed purpose. Veterans were a talking point, not a presence, their sacrifices reduced to a backdrop for photo ops. The host continued, his words dripping with rehearsed sincerity. "Our heroes deserve our gratitude," he said, gesturing grandly, "and thanks to patrons like Mr. Kane, we can show it in style." More applause followed, mechanical, as if prompted by a cue card. A woman in a sapphire dress posted a selfie with Kane, captioning it, "Supporting our troops," without a thought to who those troops might be. The irony hung heavy. An event meant to honor, sacrifice had become a stage for self-promotion. Its heart hollowed out by greed and vanity, Sophia's pride in her efficiency glowed, her earlier dismissal of the unwanted guest a triumph in her mind. She adjusted her blazer, scanning the room for Kane, eager to catch his eye. To her, the night was a success, the lounge now a shrine to wealth and influence. The crowd's laughter rang out sharp and carefree, as if the storm outside were a world away. No one spoke of the man they'd banished, his absence as inconsequential as a speck of dust on their polished shoes. The lounge's opulence stood in stark contrast to the rain-soaked reality beyond the windows. Guests sipped vintage wine, their conversations flitting from stock markets to vacation homes, oblivious to the cost of their comfort. A man in a velvet blazer praised Kane's philanthropy, unaware that true heroism didn't come with a price tag. The gala's rhetoric soared, words like duty and sacrifice tossed about like confetti, but its actions betrayed a deeper truth. Money spoke louder than valor, and appearances trumped substance. As the host introduced a video montage of flag-draped ceremonies, the crowd nodded solemnly, their faces arranged in practiced reverence, but their eyes wandered, checking phones, scanning for the next handshake. The montage played on images of soldiers fading into the background, a mere prop for the evening's narrative. Sophia, now circulating with a tray of canapes, felt a surge of satisfaction. She'd done her job, ensured the right people were celebrated. Kane's presence was proof of her discernment, or so she believed. The room's warmth was a facade, its cheers a hollow echo. The gala claimed to honor veterans, but its priorities were clear. Wealth was king, and those who didn't shine were expendable. The crowd's blindness to their own hypocrisy fueled the night's momentum, each toast a step further from the truth. Yet outside, under the relentless rain, a different story unfolded, one of resilience and memory, waiting to shatter the illusion within. The rain fell in heavy curtains outside the Grand Regency, each drop a cold sting against John Harper's weathered skin. He stood alone, his soaked flight jacket clinging to his frame. The city's neon lights blurred into a haze. Water traced paths down his face, but his gray eyes remained fixed, staring through the storm as if it held answers. The gala's distant hum, muffled by the glass doors, felt like another world, one that had rejected him with sharp words and rough hands. Yet John didn't move, his boots rooted to the pavement, a silent monument to a promise he refused to break. His fingers tightened around the crumpled invitation, its ink smudged, but its weight undeniable. It wasn't just paper. It was a vow to honor men who'd never come home, whose laughter he still heard in quiet moments. The night's earlier sting, being cast out for a man whose only virtue was wealth, stirred something deeper. A wound that hadn't healed, John's mind drifted, pulled back to 1991, to a night when the sky burned red over the Persian Gulf. He was 34, then strapped into an F-16, the cockpit shaking as anti-aircraft fire tore through the air. His jet had taken a hit, fuel leaking, alarms, screaming. Command had ordered him to eject to save himself. 5 crew members stranded in a downed chopper below were deemed lost. But John saw their faces in his mind. Young, scared, trusting him. He'd gritted his teeth, ignored the order, and banked hard, guiding the wounded plane toward a makeshift landing. Bullets pinged off the fuselage, smoke choking his lungs, but he brought that jet down, saving every man aboard. The memory was vivid, their relieved gasps, the weight of their hands gripping his shoulders in gratitude. That night had earned him scars, both on his body and within. He'd carried those men to safety. But the war's aftermath offered no such rescue. Society moved on its gratitude. Fleeting John had watched veterans like him fade into the margins, forgotten by a world that praised their deeds, but ignored their struggles. Tonight's rejection, the sneered dismissal as a nobody, echoed that same indifference. It wasn't just about a seat in a lounge. It was a reminder of how easily sacrifice could be discarded when it didn't glitter. John's breath caught a faint tremor in his chest. He whispered into the rain, voice barely audible. "I'm here for you, brothers." The words were for his fallen comrades. Mike, who'd cracked jokes to keep them sane. Tom, who'd shared his last cigarette before a mission. They'd never see this gala, never hear the hollow speeches John had promised to carry their memory, to stand in their place. That vow held him steady, now stronger than the cold seeping into his bones. The rain's rhythm became a kind of solace, each drop grounding him. He'd faced worse than this, nights pinned down by enemy fire, days wondering if he'd see dawn, a receptionist's scorn, a guard's shove. They were nothing compared to the weight of loss. Yet the pain lingered not from the act, but from what it revealed, a society that valued flash over substance, that turned its back on those who'd given everything. John's jaw clenched, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't walk away, not tonight, not ever. His hand brushed the phone in his pocket, the mysterious message still unanswered. Someone out there cared enough to tell him to stay, but who? The question gnawed at him, a spark of curiosity amidst the storm. He didn't need validation, but the thought of an ally, someone who saw him when others didn't, stirred a quiet hope. John's eyes scanned the blurred horizon. The city's pulse faint beneath the rain's roar. He'd wait not for himself, but for the truth to unfold. Inside the gala's false warmth continued, its guests blind to the man they'd exiled. John's solitude was a stark contrast, his stillness a rebuke to their noise. The invitation now, a soaked relic, was his anchor, tying him to a purpose greater than the moment's shame. He stood as he always had, unbroken, unbowed, a guardian of memories that deserved better than this night's betrayal. A shadow moved nearby, a figure approaching through the rain, eyes wide with recognition, ready to shift the tide. The rain battered the pavement outside the Grand Regency, its relentless drone a backdrop to John Harper's solitary vigil. His soaked jacket hung heavy, but his posture remained firm, a testament to years of discipline. The city's blur of lights and shadows stretched before him, indifferent to his presence. Then a slow shuffle broke the storm's rhythm. An elderly man, leaning on a cane, emerged from the downpour, his weathered face framed by a cap emblazoned with Purzo, veteran Walter Hayes. 92 squinted through the rain, his sharp eyes locking onto John with a spark of recognition. Walter's steps faltered, his cane tapping unevenly as he drew closer. "You're no ordinary man standing out here," he said, his voice gravelly but warm, carrying the weight of decades. "I know that look, seen it in the mirror after too many missions." John turned his gray eyes, meeting Walter's, a flicker of curiosity softening his guarded expression. The older man studied him, then nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "You're Harper, aren't you? The Gulf War pilot. Word got around even to us old flyboys." John's lips twitched a faint acknowledgement. "Just John," he said, his tone low, steady. "Didn't expect anyone to notice me tonight." Walter's face hardened, his grip tightening on the cane. "Notice? Hell, I heard about you years ago. F-16, right? Pulled off landings. No one else could saved your whole crew." His voice rose, indignation cutting through the rain's hiss. "And they dared kick you out for what, some fat cat donor?" The accusation hung between them, sharp and raw. John shifted his boots, scraping the wet pavement. They needed the seat for a man with deeper pockets. He said, his words clipped but calm. "Didn't think my jacket fit their idea of VIP." Walter's eyes blazed, his frail frame trembling with outrage. "That's a disgrace," he spat. "I flew P-51s in '44, lost half my squadron over Berlin. We fought so folks like you wouldn't be treated like this. And now they pull this stunt at a veterans gala." John nodded, his gaze drifting to the rain-slicked street. "I flew 6 missions in '91. He said, his voice quieter now, almost lost in the storm. "Got 18 men out alive, some from burning wrecks. Didn't do it for medals, just to bring them home." The admission was simple, unadorned, but it carried a weight that silenced Walter for a moment. The older man's expression softened pride, mingling with anger. 18 lives, he murmured. "And they call you a nobody. I'd like to march in there and give those fools a piece of my mind." John shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. "No need," he said, his tone resolute. "I've waited in worse places than this. I'll see this through." His eyes held a steely glint, a promise forged in battles Walter understood too well. The older man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're a better man than most, Harper. But this ain't right. You sure you don't want me to raise hell with the organizers?" The offer hung in the air, tempting but unneeded. John's jaw set, his gaze steady. "I'm here for the ones who didn't make it back," he said. "Not for a fight, I'll wait." Walter studied him, then gave a slow nod, respect etched in his lined face. "You've got the heart of a pilot," he said, "We never leave a mission unfinished." He clapped John's shoulder, a gesture heavy with camaraderie, then turned his cane tapping as he shuffled back into the rain. The encounter left a warmth in John's chest, a reminder of the unspoken bond between those who'd served Walter's outrage mirrored his own. But John's resolve was different. Quiet, unyielding, rooted in a purpose deeper than personal vindication. The storm's chill couldn't touch that fire. He stood taller now, his eyes scanning the blurred horizon, sensing a shift in the night's tide. The gala's distant glow flickered through the windows, a world apart from the truth he carried. Walter's words echoed in his mind, a spark of connection in the cold. John didn't know what lay ahead, but the older man's recognition had steeled him further. He was no stranger to standing alone, but knowing another saw him, really saw him, made the weight bearable. The rain's steady drumbeat was no longer just noise. It was a call to hold fast. A sudden roar pierced the storm, the wail of sirens cutting through the night, heralding a reckoning. The rain roared outside the Grand Regency, a curtain of water cloaking the night in chaos. Then a sharp screech tore through the storm tires, gripping wet asphalt, as 3 black SUVs swerved to a stop before the hotel's grand entrance. Headlights blazed, illuminating a lone figure standing resolute in the downpour. John Harper, soaked to the bone, his flight jacket dark with rain, met the glare without flinching, his gray eyes steady under the deluge. From the lead SUV, General Michael Grant emerged, his Air Force dress uniform, pristine silver stars catching the light. His face was a storm of its own fury, etched in every line as he locked eyes with John. Grant's boots hit the pavement, each step a thunderclap. He strode toward John, rain beating on his cap, but stopped short, taking in the sight, a war hero drenched and discarded, standing tall, despite the hotel's cruelty. "This is how you treat a veteran." Grant's voice boomed low and raw, directed at the cluster of staff hovering near the doors. The crowd outside, a mix of passers-by and curious guests, fell silent, sensing the weight of his presence. Sophia Reed, the receptionist, stood frozen at the entrance, her earlier swagger gone, her eyes wide with dread. "You," Grant snapped, pointing at Sophia, his finger like a lance. "Explain why this man is out here in the rain while your donor sits in luxury." Sophia's mouth opened, then closed, her voice a weak stammer. "Sir, we needed the VIP lounge for Mr. Richard Kane. He's our $5 million sponsor." The words crumbled under Grant's glare, her excuse flimsy against his rage. "Kane," he said, his tone venomous. "You chose a wallet over honor. You're done." He turned to the hotel manager, a thin man in a sweat-soaked suit who'd rushed out clutching a tablet. "Her the guards who touched him. Your event manager all fired immediately." The manager flinched, his voice a desperate squeak. "General, please, it was a mistake. We didn't mean." Grant cut him off, his eyes never leaving John's sodden figure. "A mistake. You humiliated a man who served this country with more courage than you'll ever know. That's not a mistake, it's a disgrace." The crowd murmured, phones emerging to capture the scene, their whispers buzzing. "Who is that guy? Why's the general so mad?" Grant's aides, stern in their uniforms, formed a loose perimeter, their presence amplifying the moment's gravity. John stood silent, rain streaming down his face, his expression unreadable. Grant's gaze softened for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, but his voice hardened as he addressed the staff again. "This gala claims to honor veterans, yet you've shamed one of the best. That ends now." His words carried over the storm, each syllable a hammer striking the hotel's polished facade. The manager fumbled, gesturing to a guard to do something, but the order was hollow, drowned by the general's command. Sophia's hands shook, her face ashen, as she retreated behind the reception desk, her earlier pride reduced to ash. The guards who'd shoved John hours before stood rigid, their bravado vanished under Grant's scrutiny. The crowd outside grew drawn by the SUV's flashing lights, their curiosity a rising tide. A taxi driver paused nearby, muttered, "Must be someone huge to bring a general out like this." The air thrummed with tension, the storm's fury now a backdrop to Grant's righteous anger. Grant pulled out his phone, typing a swift message, his jaw tight. "Get me the event director," he told an aide. His voice clipped. "We're fixing this starting with him." He glanced at John again, the sight of his drenched comrade fueling his resolve. The general's hand twitched, as if resisting the urge to march inside and tear the gala apart himself. Instead, he stood firm, rain glistening on his uniform, a sentinel of justice in the chaos. The hotel's glass doors reflected the scene, the gala's glow flickering within its false warmth, about to be challenged. Grant's arrival was a reckoning, his actions a promise that no one, not Kane, not the staff, could outrun the truth. John's quiet presence, unwavering in the rain, was the heart of that truth, a beacon for what was to come. The crowd's whispers swelled their questions unanswered but burning. Who was this man? And what had he done to earn such loyalty? A greater revelation loomed ready to unravel the night's illusions. The rain's fury outside the Grand Regency Hotel seemed to hush, as General Michael Grant's voice carried over the gathered crowd, his words sharp and unyielding. He stood just inside the lobby, now his uniform, a stark contrast to the drenched figure of John Harper, who remained outside, rain cascading off his weathered jacket. The general's eyes burned with a fire that silenced the murmurs of onlookers, his presence commanding every ounce of attention. He turned from the trembling hotel staff to face the guests spilling out from the VIP lounge, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. "You dared to cast this man aside." Grant said, his voice low but piercing each word, deliberate, heavy with accusation. "You saw a worn jacket and assumed he was nothing. Let me tell you who stands before you." The crowd leaned in their phones, poised breaths, held Sophia Reed. The receptionist stood rooted behind the desk. Her earlier arrogance drained her face, pale as porcelain. Richard Kane, the billionaire donor, lingered near the lounge's entrance, his confident smirk faltering, sensing the shift in the room's gravity. Grant's gaze swept over them. Unflinching Lieutenant Colonel John Harper is a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, he declared, pausing to let the weight settle. He earned 2 Purple Hearts each for wounds taken in service, and the Silver Star for gallantry that saved lives when hope was lost. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a low hum of disbelief. A woman in a silk gown clutched her necklace, her eyes wide, a silver star. She whispered to her companion, who shook his head. Stunned, the general pressed on his voice, rising resonant. In 1991, during the Gulf War, Harper flew 6 missions through enemy fire. 6, each time he defied orders to retreat, risking his life to pull 18 men, pilots, soldiers' friends from death's grip. He landed burning planes, dodged missiles, and carried men to safety when the odds said it couldn't be done. The lobby fell silent. The only sound the faint patter of rain beyond the glass. John stood motionless outside his silhouette framed by the storm, unaware of the revelation unfolding within. Sophia's hands gripped the desk, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. She'd called him a nobody, dismissed him with a sneer. Now the truth crushed her, each of Grant's words, a hammer to her pride. Kane shifted uncomfortably, his polished shoes scuffing the marble as he edged toward the shadows, his wealth suddenly insignificant. The crowd's whispers grew louder, urgent. 18 lives, a man in a tuxedo muttered. He's a legend. Another voice softer, disbelieving, and they threw him out. Grant's voice softened, but its edge remained. Harper never boasted of these deeds. He didn't wear his medals to impress you. That's what makes him a hero, and what makes your actions a disgrace. The words landed like blows, stripping away the gala's veneer. Guests exchanged glances. Some ashamed, others transfixed their earlier indifference, replaced by a dawning respect. A young waiter balancing a tray stared at John's silhouette, his eyes glistening with newfound awe. The general stepped closer to the glass doors, his gaze locked on John, who stood unmoved, rain tracing paths down his face. "This man," Grant said, his voice thick with conviction, "is the reason we're here tonight. Not your donor, not your speeches. Him." The crowd followed his gaze, their eyes drawn to the solitary figure outside his quiet strength, now a beacon in the storm. A woman in a velvet coat pressed a hand to her mouth, her face crumpling with guilt. The truth was a mirror reflecting their shallowness back at them. The lobby's air grew heavy, charged with the weight of revelation. Sophia's shoulders sagged, her earlier bravado, a distant memory. Kane, now half hidden behind a pillar, avoided eye contact, his once commanding presence reduced to a flicker. The crowd's murmurs swelled a mix of shock and reverence, their phones capturing the moment as if to preserve the truth they'd overlooked. The gala's purpose, so easily forgotten, was laid bare to honor men like John, not to glorify wealth. Grant's revelation was a thunderbolt, shattering the night's illusions. John's heroics, once confined to whispered tales, now stood exposed, undeniable. The crowd's awe was palpable, their hearts stirred by the man they'd ignored. Yet John remained outside, his resolve unbroken, a silent testament to the courage Grant described. The general's words had set the stage for something greater, a reckoning that would force the room to confront its values. A deeper lesson was coming, one that would challenge every soul present. The Grand Regency's lobby stood hushed, the air thick with the weight of truth unveiled. General Michael Grant's voice, steady and commanding, filled the space, his silver-starred uniform a beacon amidst the crowd's stunned silence. Beyond the glass doors, the rain continued its relentless assault, framing the solitary figure whose presence had reshaped the night. The general's gaze swept over the gathered guests, their faces a mosaic of awe and shame, their earlier chatter replaced by a tense stillness. His words, sharp and unyielding, were a scalpel cutting through the gala's polished veneer. "You've made a grave error." Grant began, his tone low, deliberate, each syllable a spark in the quiet. "You welcomed wealth with open arms but turned your backs on a hero. Why?" "Because his jacket wasn't tailored, his name not splashed across your donor lists." The crowd shifted uneasy, their eyes darting to the floor, to each other, anywhere. But the general's piercing stare. Richard Kane, the billionaire, whose donation had once commanded their applause, stood at the lounge's edge. His posture slumped, his influence diminished to a flicker. Grant's voice rose resonant, carrying the weight of conviction. "This night was meant to honor sacrifice, yet you chose to worship money. You saw a man's worth in his bank account, not his deeds. That's a failure, not just of this event but of your values." His words stung, exposing the crowd's complicity. A woman in a sequined gown clutched her purse, her cheeks flushed with guilt. A man in a silk tie loosened his collar as if the truth were a knot tightening around him. The general stepped forward, his boots echoing on the marble. "Lieutenant Colonel Harper didn't come here to boast." He said, his voice softening, but no less fierce. "He didn't flash his honors to buy your respect. His dignity forged in service is worth more than every dollar in this room." The crowd's silence deepened their reverence for wealth, now a hollow echo. Sophia Reed, the receptionist, stood behind the desk, her hands clasped tightly, her face a mask of regret, the sting of her earlier scorn reflected back at her Grant's gaze. Hardened, locking on to Kane. "You, sir," he said, his voice a blade, "thought your contribution made you the hero of this night. But true heroism isn't bought. It's earned in moments of courage, in choices that cost more than money." Kane's eyes dropped, his polished facade cracking his presence, shrinking under the general's scrutiny. The crowd followed Grant's lead, their glances shifting from Kane to the rain-soaked figure outside a man whose quiet strength outshone the gala's glitter. The general's voice took on a new cadence, urgent, compelling. "Look at yourselves," he said, sweeping an arm toward the guests. "How many of you would recognize valor if it stood before you unadorned? How many would see the heart of a veteran without a uniform to guide you?" The question hung unanswered, its challenge searing a young woman in a velvet dress, bit her lip, her eyes glistening. An older man, his cufflinks gleaming, nodded slowly as if seeing the world anew. Grant paused, letting the silence press against them. "This is your lesson." He continued his tone, both rebuke and plea. "Judge a person by their actions, not their appearance. Honor those who've served not because they demand it, but because they've earned it through blood, through loss, through unwavering duty." The words were a call to action, a demand for change. The crowd's faces softened, some nodding, others whispering, their hearts stirred by the general's clarity. The lobby's opulence felt hollow now, its chandeliers casting shadows that seemed to shrink under Grant's truth. The guests, once eager for selfies and status, stood humbled, their priorities realigned. Sophia's shoulders sagged, her role in the night's shame. A wound she couldn't escape, Kane now. A peripheral figure stood alone, his wealth. No shield against the general's verdict. The crowd's phones, once raised for vanity, now captured a moment of reckoning. Their focus on the man outside Grant's words were a mirror, forcing the room to confront its biases. The gala's purpose, so easily sidelined, was restored, not by applause, but by a shared awakening. The rain's distant roar underscored the moment, a reminder of the man whose dignity had sparked this shift. The crowd's gaze lingered on the glass doors where a figure stood unbowed, his presence, a challenge to their newfound resolve. A gesture of respect was imminent, ready to honor the man they'd wronged. The Grand Regency's lobby stood in a reverent hush, the weight of a hard-earned truth settling over the crowd. The rain's steady rhythm outside was a faint echo overshadowed by the electric tension within. General Michael Grant's words had stripped away the gala's pretensions, leaving the guests humbled, their eyes drawn to the glass doors, where a lone figure stood unyielding against the storm. The hotel manager, a wiry man named Charles Fenton, emerged from the shadows, his face pale, his hands trembling as he approached the entrance. His suit, once crisp, clung to him with nervous sweat, his authority dwarfed by the moment's gravity. Lieutenant Colonel Harper Fenton stammered, his voice cracking, barely audible over the crowd's murmurs. "Please, sir, come inside. You belong here." His plea was raw, a desperate bid to undo the night's shame. John Harper, his flight jacket sodden, his gray hair plastered to his forehead, met the manager's gaze with a quiet intensity. He nodded once, a gesture of acceptance, not triumph, and stepped through the doors, water dripping onto the marble floor with each measured stride. The crowd parted like a tide, their faces a mix of awe and contrition, phones raised to capture the man whose presence now commanded the room. John's boots echoed softly, his posture unbowed, his eyes steady, cutting through the gala's opulence with a clarity that needed no adornment. The VIP lounge, once a shrine to wealth, felt small in his shadow as he entered, the air shifting with his arrival. The guests, clad in silks and tailored suits, stood frozen, their earlier indifference replaced by a profound respect. General Grant, his uniform gleaming under the chandeliers, stepped forward, his expression solemn. He stopped before John, his silver stars catching the light, and lowered his head in a deep, deliberate bow. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said, his voice resonant, carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm here because of you. On behalf of this city, this nation, I apologize for the disgrace you endured tonight." The words were a balm, a public reckoning that stirred the crowd's hearts. A woman in a pearl choker pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes glistening. A man nearby nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. John's gaze swept the room, calm but unwavering, acknowledging the general's gesture. He offered no smile, only a slight incline of his dignity, a quiet force that outshone the apology's grandeur. The crowd's phones recorded, but their focus was visceral, drawn to the man whose resilience had redefined the night, Richard Kane. The billionaire whose name had once dominated the evening stood at the lounge's edge, his face ashen. He averted his eyes, unable to meet John's gaze, and slipped through a side door, his departure unnoticed, his influence eclipsed by a man who needed no wealth to command respect. The lounge's velvet drapes framed the scene, their richness paling beside John's weathered jacket, now a symbol of honor. The crowd's murmurs grew soft, reverent, their applause withheld, replaced by a deeper silence that spoke of reckoning. Sophia Reed, the receptionist, lingered behind a pillar, her hands clasped her earlier. Scorn, a bitter memory she couldn't escape. The guests, once eager for status, now stood in the presence of true greatness, their priorities reshaped by the man they'd wronged. Grant's bow lingered, a gesture of solidarity that anchored John's return. The general straightened his eyes, meeting John's with unspoken respect, a bond forged in service. "You should have been our guest of honor," he said, his voice softer now but firm. "This moment is yours." John's silence was his reply, his presence enough to fill the room, a testament to a life of action over words. The crowd's gaze followed him, their hearts stirred by the man who'd stood through the rain, unbowed, unbroken. The lounge with its gilded tables and crystal felt transformed, its purpose reclaimed by John's arrival. The gala's false warmth was gone, replaced by a raw human connection to the man before them. A young waiter, his tray forgotten, stared at John, his eyes bright with admiration. An older woman, her diamonds sparkling, whispered, "He's the heart of this night." The crowd's phones, now lowered, captured not a spectacle, but a moment of truth, a reminder of what mattered. John's return was a quiet victory, his dignity, a light that dimmed the lounge's glitter. The crowd, once blind, now saw him clearly, their shame tempered by awe. The night's weight shifted, setting the stage for a message that would echo far beyond these walls. The Grand Regency's VIP lounge, once a bastion of shallow glamour, now held a reverent stillness. John Harper stood at its heart, his damp flight jacket a stark contrast to the room's gilded elegance. The crowd, their faces softened by newfound respect, watched as he stepped toward a small platform, a microphone thrust into his hand by a trembling event host. John's gray eyes swept the room, calm, yet piercing, his presence commanding without effort. He raised the microphone, and when he spoke, his voice was deep resonant, carrying a quiet power that filled every corner. "I didn't come here for applause." He began, his tone steady, each word deliberate, unadorned. "I came to stand for those who can't, men and women who served, who gave everything, and now live in the shadows of your cities." The crowd leaned in their breath, held phones lowered as his words wove a spell. A woman in a sapphire gown clasped her hands, her eyes glistening. A man near the back, his suit rumpled, nodded slowly, as if hearing a truth long ignored. John's voice dipped softer now, but no less compelling. Out there under bridges and hospital wards, thousands of veterans wake each day to a world that's forgotten them. They don't ask for pity. They ask for respect, not for their medals, but for their humanity. The room grew still, the clink of glasses, a distant memory. His words were a mirror reflecting the crowd's privilege back at them, urging them to see beyond their gilded bubble. He paused, his gaze distant, as if reaching into memory. "Last year," he said, his voice catching slightly, I lost a friend, Mike Thornton. He flew beside me in '91, kept us laughing through the darkest nights. But when he came home, the battles didn't stop. The world turned away, and Mike, he couldn't carry the weight alone. He took his own life. A gasp rippled through the crowd, soft but sharp. A young woman in a velvet dress pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling. An older man, his cufflinks glinting, bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. John's voice steadied, but its urgency grew. Mike wasn't weak. He was stronger than most, braver than you can imagine. But courage doesn't pay rent. It doesn't silence the voices that haunt you. He needed a hand, not a handshake. The crowd's silence was profound, their faces etched with sorrow, guilt, and a dawning resolve. John's words weren't an accusation, but a plea, a call to see the invisible, to act where others had failed. "Don't wait for a uniform to honor them," he said, his tone rising fervent. "Don't wait for a ceremony or a medal to notice the veterans serving your coffee, driving your bus, or sleeping on your streets. See them now. Help them now." His voice carried a quiet fire, each word a spark igniting the crowd's conscience. A waiter standing near the bar gripped his tray tighter, his eyes bright with pride. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered to her companion, "We have to do something." John's gaze swept the room, meeting eyes that now saw him clearly. "This night isn't about me," he said, his voice low, resolute. "It's about the ones who didn't make it home and the ones still fighting to find their place. Give them your respect, not with words, but with action." The crowd nodded, some wiping tears, others clutching hands. Their hearts stirred by a man who spoke not for glory but for truth. The lounge's opulence faded its chandeliers, dimmed by the weight of John's message. The crowd, once lost in vanity, now stood united, their purpose realigned. A young man in a tuxedo murmured, "He's right, we've ignored them too long." A woman nearby nodded, her voice soft. "It starts with us." The microphone in John's hand felt heavy, not with its weight, but with the responsibility it carried, a voice for the voiceless, amplified by his quiet strength. John stepped back, handing the microphone to the host, who fumbled it, overwhelmed. The crowd's silence held, a sacred pause, as if unwilling to break the spell. John's words had reshaped the night, turning a moment of personal vindication into a rallying cry. The gala, once a hollow stage, now pulsed with purpose, its guests awakened to a cause greater than themselves. The rain outside continued a distant echo, but within a fire had been kindled, ready to spark change. A wave of action loomed, poised to carry John's words beyond the night. The Grand Regency's VIP lounge, still reverberating with the echo of heartfelt words, became a crucible for change. The crowd, their faces alight with newfound purpose, stood in a quiet unity, their earlier vanities replaced by a shared resolve. The air, once heavy with tension, now carried a spark of possibility, as if the night's revelations had ignited a path forward. At the edge of the platform, the hotel's leadership gathered their expressions, a mix of contrition and urgency. The moment demanded more than apologies. It demanded action, and the Grand Regency was about to answer. Charles Fenton, the hotel manager, stepped forward, his voice unsteady but determined, his suit creased from the night's turmoil. On behalf of the Grand Regency, he began his words, halting raw. "We offer our deepest regret for the injustice done tonight. We failed a man of extraordinary honor, and that failure is ours to bear." The crowd listened, their eyes attentive, some nodding, others holding their breath. Fenton's hands shook as he continued. "Effective immediately, our event manager has been relieved of duty. Such errors will not be repeated." The announcement landed with a quiet force, a tangible step toward accountability. The crowd murmured a low hum of approval, their phones poised, but still as if respecting the gravity of the moment. Fenton's voice grew firmer, a pledge taking shape. "We are launching a nationwide training program," he said, called Respect Beyond Appearances. "Every employee from concierge to executive will learn to see the worth in every guest, no matter their attire." The words were a vow, a commitment to reshape the hotel's culture, and the crowd's faces softened, sensing sincerity. Fenton paused his gaze, sweeping the room. "To support those who've served," he added, "we're donating $20,000 to a foundation for veteran housing effective tomorrow." A ripple of applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling a genuine outpouring of support. A woman in a silver dress clapped fiercely, her eyes bright with hope. A man nearby whispered to his companion, "That's a start." The donation, though a small gesture in the face of systemic need, was a concrete act. A bridge from words to impact. The manager's voice took on a new weight. "We've asked Lieutenant Colonel Harper to serve as an advisor," he said, "to guide us in honoring veterans with the respect they deserve." The crowd's applause grew louder, a wave of affirmation, their admiration for the man whose presence had sparked this shift. John, standing quietly near the platform, offered a slight nod, his expression calm, accepting the role not for glory, but for purpose. The room's energy shifted, a collective resolve to do better, to be better. As Fenton stepped back, a young staff member hurried to a laptop, uploading a video of the night's pivotal moments to the hotel's social media. The clip capturing the general's arrival, the crowd's awakening, and the manager's pledge spread like wildfire, amassing 5 million views in a single day. Comments poured in. "This is what accountability looks like." One read. "Thank you for seeing," veterans said another. The video's reach stretched far beyond the hotel's walls, its message a beacon for change resonating with strangers who'd never set foot in the lounge. The Grand Regency's actions were more than a response to a single night. They were a reckoning with a deeper flaw. The crowd, once swayed by wealth's allure, now saw the power of accountability, their hearts stirred by a commitment that went beyond rhetoric. A waiter, his apron smudged, stood taller, pride in his workplace renewed. A guest in a tailored coat murmured, "They're actually doing something. The donation, the training, the advisor role. They were steps imperfect but real toward a world that valued service over status." The lounge's chandeliers cast a softer light, now their glow reflecting a room transformed. The guests, their phones now tucked away, lingered, discussing ways to support the cause. A woman in a velvet shawl approached Fenton, offering to connect the hotel with a veterans' charity. Another guest, his tie loosened, scribbled notes inspired to advocate for similar changes at his own company. The night's impact was palpable, a ripple that promised to grow, fueled by a message that had taken root in every heart present. The hotel's pledge was a testament to the power of truth to reshape systems, to turn shame into progress. The crowd's applause faded, but their resolve did not, their eyes bright with the possibility of a better future. The rain outside, now a gentle patter, seemed to signal a turning point, a cleansing of the night's earlier wrongs. The Grand Regency had begun to change its actions, a foundation for something greater, a legacy born from one man's quiet strength. A deeper act of compassion was about to unfold, reaching even those who'd caused the night's pain. The Grand Regency's VIP lounge, now a crucible of transformation, hummed with a quiet energy as the gala's formalities wound down. The crowd, their hearts stirred by a night of reckoning, lingered in small clusters, their conversations softer, more earnest. John Harper stood near a gilded pillar, his damp flight jacket a quiet emblem of resilience, his gray eyes scanning the room with a calm that belied the storm he'd endured. The hotel's pledges had set a new course, but for John, the night's work wasn't complete. A deeper act of humanity beckoned, one that would reach beyond the room's newfound resolve. As guests began to drift toward the exits, John moved with purpose, his steps measured but deliberate. He approached a secluded corner where Sophia Reed, the former receptionist, stood alone. Her blazer wrinkled her face, etched with regret. Beside her, Tom Ellis, one of the security guards who'd escorted John out, shifted uncomfortably. His broad shoulders hunched, his uniform badge glinting dully. Both had been stripped of their roles, their futures uncertain, their earlier actions, a shadow they couldn't escape. John's presence startled them, their eyes widening, braced for judgment. Sophia, John said, his voice low, steady, carrying a warmth that disarmed her. Tom. He nodded at the guard, his gaze unflinching but kind. Sophia's breath hitched, her hands twisting together, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry," she said, her words trembling raw. "I didn't know. I was wrong." Tom's jaw tightened, his voice gruff. "We messed up, sir. I should have questioned it." Their apologies hung in the air, fragile, burdened by shame. John's expression softened, a faint smile touching his lips. "We all make mistakes," he said, his tone gentle, like a steady hand on a turbulent flight. "I've made my share. Once in '91, my plane took a hit over the Gulf. I nearly left my crew behind to save myself. But someone believed I could do better, gave me a second chance." His words were a lifeline, simple but profound, drawing a sharp breath from Sophia. Tom's eyes glistened, his fists unclenching as if a weight had begun to lift. From his pocket, John produced 2 business cards, their edges worn, each bearing the name of a veteran support center. "This place," he said, handing one to each, "helps people find their way. They need staff who've learned respect the hard way." His voice was firm but not unkind, a call to rise rather than a rebuke. "Tell them I sent you. Learn from this and make it right." Sophia's fingers trembled as she took the card, her eyes brimming with tears. Why, she whispered, her voice breaking. "After what I did," John's gaze held hers steady, unwavering. "Because everyone deserves a chance to stand back up," he said. "I've seen men fall in war and rise again. You can too." The words struck deep, a testament to a life shaped by compassion as much as courage. Sophia's tears spilled over, a quiet sob escaping as she clutched the card, gratitude mingling with her remorse. Tom swallowed hard, his voice thick. "Thank you, sir," he said, his hand closing around the card like a vow. "I won't forget this." The moment was intimate, a quiet exchange amid the lounge's fading bustle. A nearby guest, overhearing, paused, her eyes softening with admiration. Another, adjusting his tie, watched in silence, moved by a gesture that spoke louder than the night's speeches. John's act of grace was a beacon illuminating a path not of vengeance, but of redemption. Sophia wiped her eyes, her face a mix of resolve and gratitude, as if seeing a future she hadn't dared imagine. Tom stood taller, his shoulders squared, a flicker of purpose reigniting. John stepped back, his work done, his expression calm, unburdened by the weight of their past actions. "Start fresh," he said, his voice a quiet command. "That's all I ask." He turned, leaving them to their thoughts, his presence lingering like a steady flame. The crowd, now thinning, carried a new reverence, their hearts touched by a man who'd turned pain into possibility. Sophia and Tom exchanged a glance, their cards held tightly, a shared commitment taking root. The lounge's opulence, once a symbol of exclusion, now felt humbled, its grandeur secondary to the humanity unfolding within. A waiter clearing glasses caught Sophia's eye and nodded a silent gesture of support. A guest, her shawl draped loosely, murmured to her husband, "That's what strength looks like." John's compassion had reshaped not just 2 lives, but the room's collective soul, a reminder that forgiveness could be as powerful as justice. The night's transformation was far from over, its ripples poised to spark a movement that would echo far beyond these walls, The Grand Regency's VIP lounge, once a stage for a night of reckoning, had faded into memory, but its impact rippled far beyond that rain-soaked evening. A year later, the hotel stood as a beacon of change, its marble halls now hosting a different kind of gathering. Across the United States, a movement called Honor Beyond Appearances had taken root, transforming countless venues into havens for those who'd served. The seeds planted in a single night had grown into a nationwide effort, one that carried a quiet man's vision into the lives of thousands. In cities from coast to coast, hotels opened their doors to job fairs, offering veterans pathways to stable work. Medical clinics funded by redirected gala budgets provided care for those bearing unseen scars. Shelters bolstered by donations offered warm beds to men and women who'd once slept beneath overpasses. The movement wasn't flashy. No red carpets, no champagne, but its impact was profound, measured in lives reclaimed, in dignity restored. A veteran in Chicago landed a mechanic's job, his hand steady for the first time in years. A woman in Seattle haunted by combat found therapy that eased her nights. These were the movement's triumphs, quiet but enduring. John Harper, now 69, remained at the heart of it all, though he shunned the spotlight. He lived simply in a modest home, surrounded by family. His days filled with walks through his garden and letters from those he'd inspired. He'd accepted a role as an advisor, not for recognition, but to ensure the movement stayed true to its purpose. His voice calm and measured guided organizers over phone calls, urging them to prioritize the forgotten, those who wore no medals, who carried their service in silence. His input shaped every event, a steady hand steering a ship he'd never sought to captain Sophia Reed and Tom Ellis, once agents of the night's injustice, had found redemption through the path John offered. Now they led training sessions for hotel staff nationwide, their voices carrying the weight of lessons hard-learned. Sophia, her confidence tempered by humility, spoke of seeing beyond appearances. Her words, earnest, heartfelt Tom. His gruff demeanor softened shared stories of veterans he'd met, urging others to listen before judging. Their sessions, held in conference rooms and lobbies, drew attentive crowds, each participant leaving with a new perspective. In a quiet moment, they mailed John a letter, its words simple but profound. "You saved us from our worst selves. Thank you." John kept it in a drawer, a reminder that change was possible even in the unlikeliest hearts. The video from that pivotal night had become a touchstone, its reach staggering. Uploaded in the heat of the gala's transformation, it captured the raw emotion of a moment when truth prevailed. 15 million views later, it lived on, shared across platforms, its message resonating with strangers who'd never stepped into the Grand Regency. Comments poured in a chorus of voices. "This is what honor looks like," one wrote. "We need more men like him," said another. The clip, with its grainy footage of a rain-soaked figure and a general's fierce resolve, inspired action donations to veteran causes, volunteer sign-ups, even policy changes in distant cities. The movement's success was a testament to a single night's power, a night when one man's dignity had shifted a system's course. Hotels that once prized wealth now trained their staff to see service, to ask questions, to offer respect before judgment. The Grand Regency led the way, its lobby adorned with a small plaque. In honor of those who serve seen and unseen, guests passing through paused to read it, their thoughts turning to the man whose story had sparked it all. John's legacy was not in fame, but in the lives touched by his quiet strength. He'd shown that compassion could outshine anger, that a single act could ripple outward, changing hearts and systems alike. The movement thrived not because of headlines, but because of its truth, that every veteran deserved to be seen, not for their attire, but for their sacrifices. The lesson was clear. enduring judge a person by their deeds, not their appearance. Honor the silent heroes who walk among us. The rain had long stopped, but its memory lingered, a symbol of a night when justice and grace prevailed. The Grand Regency and countless others stood transformed, their doors open to all who'd served John in his garden, looked to the sky content to let the world carry his message forward. The story closed, complete its echoes, a call to see, to act, to honor. The storm at the Grand Regency has passed, but its echoes ripple through hearts and halls, a testament to one man's unyielding spirit. His stand against injustice, his grace in forgiveness, and his vision for change remind us that true honor shines in the quiet acts of courage we choose every day. How will you see the unseen heroes in your world, those whose sacrifices go unnoticed? If this story of valor and hope stirred your soul, hit like, share it with others, and subscribe to keep these powerful tales alive. From bustling streets to tranquil corners, let's carry this lesson forward. Look beyond the surface, honor the heart, and build a world where every sacrifice is seen. Until we meet again, keep the flame of compassion burning.